Welcome to another Catholic Family News special report. I'm Brian McCall, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Liz Yore. Thank you for coming on our show today. We're happy to have you.
Thank you, Brian. I'm a big fan of both your speeches and your writing, so it's an honor to be with you. It's been a long time coming to be able to talk with you, so I'm thrilled.
It is. I think you and I have been a little bit like ships passing in the night for years. We'd see each other at conferences or pass by. This is the first time we've been able to spend significant time having a conversation. So that's great.
Right.
So for the maybe 2% of you who have never heard of Liz Yore, because I'm sure all of you have, she is really done some incredible work. She's an international child protection attorney specializing in the investigation of missing, abducted, and exploited children. She was general counsel for the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services, where she created the nation's very first child welfare missing wards unit at that department, which identifies, tracks, and recovers missing children. She also served as general counsel and director of the international division at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in Arlington, Virginia, which is the national clearinghouse for missing and exploited children. And she has, as maybe may not have known about that, but as you know, she also appears in many places. I've seen her at many conferences, I said, but she's been on Steve Bannon's War Room, just for example. And she writes prolifically across many sites, Town Hall, Breitbart, Daily Caller, and our friends at the Remnant. And I really do want to thank you for, your work you've done on Archbishop Vigano and the crisis in the church, but really your work for children. This is one of those, particularly the abduction of children for sex trafficking, is one of these sort of silent crises in our society that so few people think about, pay attention to. Again, a lot of us really fight on the abortion issue, which is good, but that is something that is a hidden persecution in our society, and to be really on the ground rescuing children and helping with that is just incredible work. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Brian.
So, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're going to talk about Archbishop Vigano and Theodore McCarrick. As our viewers know, Archbishop Vigano, many people didn't even know his name before the summer of 2018, when he emerged with the 11 pages that was the shot heard around the world of testimony decrying and whistleblowing on the exploits of Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. The Archbishop then went into seclusion in somewhere in Europe, but continued to write and to develop his thoughts and to explain them to us. The Pope promised a thorough investigation and a report into these revelations that was long in coming, was promised, never came, finally emerged in November of this year, 2020, so a little over 2 years from Archbishop Vigano's testimony. Report was massive, as I've talked about, 460 pages, lots of issues, lots of problems. You can look at Catholic Family News website for the full analysis we did, or for an analysis we did of it. But reason I wanted to invite Liz on today is Archbishop Vigano himself issued a really important discussion of the report, talks about lots of important issues. What went wrong? What was the abuse? What happened? But there's some really interesting parts of Archbishop Vigano's assessment of the McCarrick report that a lot of mainstream media and even Catholic media, I think, have not really picked up on. They haven't noticed. And what we're going to do is kind of explore some of those hidden gems that I think our Archbishop has given us that are really, really important that he may not have even noticed in there. So let's start with the very first one. And this is one that I think both of us, I particularly was caught off guard. It never occurred to me. And this is where the Archbishop says, McCarrick got off lightly. He actually being laicized, and I have to admit, my reaction, I was like, wow, finally a hard punishment. Somebody's getting punished for doing something bad. It was my reaction, and I never realized until I read this from Vigano that there was actually something a little more sinister there. He says that this was really a light punishment, that really he should have been thrown in a Vatican prison for what he did, and being laicized was really an easy thing. And I want to read a quote. He says, in fact, just laicizing him gives McCarrick more freedom. McCarrick now, quote, according to Vigano, resides in a secret locality where he can continue undisturbed in his para-diplomatic activity on behalf of the deep state and the deep church in the anonymous guise of a layman. Wow, that hit me as just a revelation. And what is that? What do you think the Archbishop's telling us about what McCarrick has been and continues to be up to by that reference?
Well, I was shocked by it too. And I was also shocked why mainstream media and others did not pick up on it. And it's, having worked, hundreds of clergy abuse cases, having been involved in investigations that ended up having a priest, a prominent priest in Chicago, end up in jail, who's still in jail. I too agree with Vigano and understand that laicization, especially for the victims, and especially for future victims, is a dangerous path to go down. My own belief is that unless predators are locked up in prison or 6 feet under, that they remain until their last breath a danger to vulnerable children or vulnerable adults, and especially someone like McCarrick. And and I believe, I came out of my chair in August of 2018 when my phone was going off. I was at a wedding, and there, the news was breaking about Viganos Letter on McCarrick. I too, many years ago, had heard rumors of McCarrick, which, needless to say, were shocking because he was so prominent. And so, Vigano has pulled back the curtain, not only on the clergy abuse crisis, not only the power center of the McCarrick diplomatic, deep state, deep church operation, also with respect to the Francis Vatican. And, he has done us such a service. Here, the church and the bishops have been saying, it's all over, nothing more to see. All the provisions have been put in place. Everything's fine. No, it's not happening anymore. And what Vic wants understanding of how they operate, especially somebody like McCarrick, who's not only preying on seminarians and boys himself, but grooming and luring and recruiting young men into the priesthood at his behest, so that it has become a generational scourge on the church, thanks to people like Ted McCarrick. Similarly, his commentary, Vigano's commentary on what is going on at the Vatican is very, very important. And although it's stunning and jarring for Catholics, so too is the revelations that are happening in our country about our government and the corruption and the alliances with China and the communists. But, we're grown-ups. We have to have our eyes open. And, for the first time, I feel like there is now a recognition of evil. Since Roe versus Wade, truth and evil have been discarded and masqueraded. And we've never been allowed to really have that discussion anymore, call something evil. This is what Vigano, as well as, I think Trump to a certain extent, has been shining the light on the dark corners. And, what I love, Brian, is that people are really stepping up. They're not, oh no, I can't look.
Yes.
Americans and Catholics, and all I have to say about Vigano, I'm going to just say this, because I've seen this on Twitter and on Facebook. His truth telling is a powerful evangelization tool. I mean, Protestants have been, coming up to me, have been commenting on Twitter. I may become Catholic with this guy, Vigano.
Yeah, I've heard people say, if he were your Pope, I might become Catholic.
Exactly. Yes. And so it's, we have to stop and say, that it's important to recognize truth however heinous, because truth in and of itself will be able to purify the church. So with respect to his commentary about what's going on in the Francis Vatican and has been going on, it's important for us to look and to be unrelenting in criticizing and demanding that it gets cleaned up. And by the way, you know, Francis, who says, you know, when the Americans criticize me, I consider it an honor.
Yes.
So I guess our commentaries are reaching the Vatican, right? They're getting there. So I consider that progress. And the confirmation from Archbishop Vigano is further solace that we're on the right path.
Yes.
With respect to his shining the light on McCarrick and the process of laicization, and how that it was a sleight of hand by Pope Francis and the Secretary of State. I think he's suggesting to all of us and those who are so interested to continue to explore, number one, what is McCarrick up to?
Yes.
What has he been up to? I think, frankly, Brian, we only know the tip of the iceberg. I think, you know, and I can talk about, you know, going to the Vatican early on in the Francis pontificate and what happened when I was there. But this needs to be further explored. Who are McCarrick's allies? What is McCarrick doing? Did McCarrick have something to do with we know he was very involved in the original China deal.
Yes.
Is he involved in the renewal last October of the China deal? What else is he, you know, what was his involvement with respect to the Biden election? What was his involvement with respect to the, you know, basically complicity and silence of the USCCB in this just critically important election, and the alliance of many bishops with, you know, failing to criticize Joe Biden, the quote unquote Catholic.
Well, and I also thought, was he involved with the sellout by the bishops of the faithful during the COVID-19 lockdowns, when the bishops basically seemed to get together and shut the church down in this country?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
And that has had, you know, just absolutely catastrophic effects on the faith, and much like Vatican II did, much like the clergy abuse scandal. I mean, you can see the hand of the devil in all these things. You know, let me see. I am going to devise a scandal that will bring the church into poverty, that will destroy souls who've been victimized by priests, the church will lose its moral authority, and people will flee from the church. There you go. It's the clergy abuse scandal. To say nothing of, now on top of that, the COVID, you know,
which with that, I mean, I think clearly the devil's idea is, you know, get people to do this for 6-7 months. There's no church, don't go to mass. And then when it comes back, how many people will go back? Because think about it. Well, you know, they tell me I have to go, but it obviously wasn't that important to the bishop. He shut it down for months. And you know what? I didn't go to mass for 6 months and I didn't get struck by lightning, right? It's to acculturate people that maybe this isn't really as important as I used to think.
Exactly, Brian. And we should be having this discussion.
Yes.
You know, what's the impact of this laxity, you know, in the practice of our faith? The other thing, this may be small, but I don't think it is, you know, going to church as I do with my mask on, there's no holy water. Is it any wonder that the devil is flourishing? We have none of the protections of the sacramentals anymore.
Yes.
Even those have been taken away from us. And
well, it's like a priest once said to me, talking about the removal of exorcisms from the baptism, said, who's the only person in the universe that would benefit from that?
Yes,
who benefits from people not using holy water? That's a great point. Yes.
You know, I saw in Nantes, France, they had an outdoor mass, but it was also a protest because they were in front of the Mass of St. Louis Cathedral, 400 people demanding to open up the churches in France. Now, you and I know there are about at least 100 Gothic cathedrals in France that hold up to 10,000 people. Now, in France, you won't even find 1,000 people to go to mass, let alone 10,000 people. And yet, for separation, you would say for distancing,
Yeah.
certainly it would be easy of all the places to go to these cathedrals, but nope, they're going to shut them down. And of course, they're getting their dictates from
Yes.
the papal nuncios and from the Vatican. So
Yes.
back to Vigano and the
Yes.
the McCarrick report, which Ted McCarrick has provided all of us with a window into what has happened to the Catholic Church in America in the last 50, 60 years, if not before that, and also the geopolitical dynamics between the Catholic Church and the U.S. government, especially the Democratic Party.
Yes.
And I think this evil that has infested, our culture, has now allowed us to see the infiltration of communism through McCarrick, the infiltration of this homosexual agenda, which, now keep in mind, Pope Francis made that outrageous statement, "Who am I to judge?"
Yes.
July,
Very early in the
I
pontificate.
think
Yeah.
it was, of
Yes.
2013. And he was elected to the papal seat in March of 2013. So it began very early on. And you have to believe, knowing people like McCarrick, who were behind the scenes orchestrating his election, and we know from the St. Gallen Mafia, that was one of the tenets that was important to weaken in the Catholic Church. And boy, he did it right away. Now, Americans should know, Francis became Man of the Year. His face and picture was on the cover of the Gay Advocate magazine as Person of the Year for that statement. And, Francis is savvy enough as a Jesuit to know, I'll just throw out this offhanded remark and see the ripple effect throughout the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
sending a message to the priests, the bishops around the world. It's, everybody's seems to be listening to it except for the African bishops. So, at the heart of the corruption in the church is this one powerful man. It's important, as I think Vigano has pointed out, is to, the church and its role in geopolitical affairs was, with respect to McCarrick, diabolical.
Yes, I think that's the right word, diabolical.
And as long as McCarrick is alive, because his thing is political power. I mean, yes. He also has this sickness obsession with predation.
Yes.
That is, and I've read a lot. I've read a lot of books, a lot of articles about McCarrick, and I will tell you, based on what I've seen, that few have seen, we have not even begun to identify the victims that are out there,
Wow.
or the tactics that he used. When Metuchen, New Jersey, became a new diocese because the population in New Jersey was flourishing, so the Catholics. He was the first bishop of Metuchen, and they have kind of a yearbook and a book about the first years of McCarrick and Metuchen. Nearly, it's like a diary of everything he did every day.
Wow.
And what was just chilling to me is at his inaugural mass, he sent out the word to all the parishes in the Diocese of Metuchen to send 10 altar boys to his mass. And, 10 each from each parish. Those are the things that, before Vigano, you would have just read on and not thought anything of it. His constant visit to the seminaries, his bragging about the huge increase in vocations, reading his homilies and how he invokes the Blessed Mother and other. It's a window into how these guys operate, and how duplicitous they are. And he was the glad-handing, charming, And I'm 100% Irish, I can say this. They call them Slovenes in Ireland. You know,
Ah,
the con men, the charm, the glint of his eye,
yes.
nothing but a monster.
Wow.
And he just never let any opportunity pass where he wasn't trying to prey on a seminarian or a young vulnerable boy.
Wow.
Um, and but also was able to wield money and power like just enormously talented with respect to fundraising and inserting himself into the political agenda. And Archbishop Vigano knows that. And I think with respect to the report, blaming Saint John Paul II, as Francis did in Paroline, the Secretary of State,
Hmm.
whoever wrote the report, I don't know. To me, it's very revealing to what's going on right now. Of course, they're going to try to take down communists' greatest enemy. When John Paul II became Pope, KGB went into a meltdown.
Yes.
They were, immediately trying to figure out how they could assassinate him. If you look at the secret archives from the Soviet Union, you can see, I've read reports of,
Yes.
they immediately started planning his demise. And so fast forward how many years, 50, 60 years, 50 years, you see we have to blame this opponent of communism,
Mm.
this popular saint.
And yeah, when I read it, it struck me as well. It's so disproportionate because again,
Yeah,
John Paul II appears to have some responsibility for this. He made the decision in the year
right,
2000, and he reversed his own decision. So
right.
again, I think a real report would certainly point that out, but this is done in a way essentially to shift all the blame to him and Benedict XVI for the purpose, as Vigano tells us, to just exonerate Pope Francis. And I say John Paul II has been dead for 15 years.
Yes.
McCarrick did a lot of things after
Right.
2005 when John Paul II died. So whatever blame belongs there, it's only a very small, in many ways, part of the story. But if we can there's another part of the Vigano's response or his critique that I connected to this passage, and I think you've touched on it. See what you think. He, the very end, points out to us that there's an unspoken victim, another victim, aside from all the children and young people and men and seminarians, and that's the church herself.
Mhm.
And I think what you point out here is really interesting because this phrase that he's still lurking about, essentially anonymously as a layman, that I think what I read, Vigano is telling us there are two dangers that you pointed out. There may be people he is physical, individual people that he is preying on now because he can hide out. But number two, he can prey on the church in his working, as he says here, his work for the deep state and the deep church. And again, I see this connection that he's saying it's not just who we have to protect. It's not just we need to. I like your example. If there's been a proven convicted predator, okay, maybe they serve their time, but they always need to be watched because there's a danger there that he needs to be, both of these victims need to be protected. The church herself and these victims, and that he's really telling us, I think you said, ask more questions. There's something going on. But I
Yeah,
don't know, do you see that connection?
yes, I do. And, it's not a surprise, although it is a head scratching surprise that Joe Biden became president when he was not winning in the primary. The McCarrick and Biden relationship
Yes.
goes way back.
Yes.
People should know that Joe Biden and Barack Obama in 2014 called in McCarrick into the White House, into the SCIF, which is the secret room where they discuss state secrets, and began this rapprochement with Cuba to normalize relations with communist Cuba. And it was, Brian, it was so secret that even the people on the State Department desk, Cuba desk, didn't even know that these
Wow.
negotiations were going on. So
Wow.
he calls in McCarrick. McCarrick has the shuttle diplomacy between the Vatican and Cuba, delivering letters from Obama and Francis. And Francis did this backdoor diplomacy to result in this normalization with Cuba and the United States. And why it was so, again, diabolical is because they did not want the Cuban freedom fighters in Miami to get wind of these negotiations. And they, this is the other thing, Barack Obama needed to find a diplomatic entree that was trusted by Cuba. And who would that be but McCarrick and the Vatican and Pope Francis? How troubling is that, right?
Wow.
And so there's that strong McCarrick-Biden connection, which was further solidified in the Cuba deal. Then we know that there was a secret meeting, not on Pope Benedict's calendar or on Joe Biden's calendar. Joe Biden went to the Vatican in June of 2011 or 2012, and had a secret meeting with Benedict. We have no idea what that meeting was about. But we do know from, various books that there was increasingly pressure. And in fact, Vigano talks about the pressure cooker that they were putting Benedict under to make life for Benedict intolerable at the Vatican. And again, we know that who did early in the papacy, Pope Francis reached out to none other than McCarrick and dispatched him to communist China to begin negotiations with them. And okay, folks, this is an out and out lie that they were just signing an agreement that Benedict had negotiated and Benedict had agreed to. That is a lie.
Yes.
There was never those discussions broke down when there was a demand by communist China that the Vatican sever any relations with Taiwan. And so there was never any agreement with the Vatican and China. This was a fresh initiative. And Francis, interestingly, knew that McCarrick had been to China and had friends in the Communist Chinese Party, as well as friendships with high Communist Chinese officials. He went back, 3 or 4 times, delivering messages back and forth. And this is the communist element of McCarrick that we oftentimes find hard to believe because, oh my gosh, he looks like a cute little leprechaun and he's an American with, and why would he be such a, but we know about St. Gallen. We know that he went there as a 17-year-old. We know about Fritz Platten, who is the head of, I think, Socialist International and in Communist International, that was a training ground. And of course, we know about Belladad. So now, one of the things that I did, because I felt that there was something more going on with respect to the abdication of Benedict and the election of Francis.
And Vigano, I think, directs us back to ask questions about that in this commentary. Yes.
I was part of 7 people who wrote a letter to President Trump in January of 2017, asking a number of questions with respect to what did the American government intelligence community know about both the abdication of Benedict, what role did they play, if any, about the closing down of the ATMs, and about the election of Francis. Now, there's been lots of news accounts that the NSA and CIA listen to what goes on in the conclave. But for my analysis of it, and I was weaned on Chicago political politics, machine politics. My analysis of it is that Benedict, if you just look at the agenda that Benedict had set almost immediately, it was the re-Christianization of Europe. It was the return to traditional in the Catholic Church. Benedict was smart enough to not buy the climate change nonsense.
Yes.
Benedict was also very intuitive and understanding about the importance of sovereignty. And so the globalist agenda was facing a big brick wall in the Benedict papacy. And frankly, for what, 7 or 8 years, however long he was Pope, there wasn't the kind of movement in the New World Order agenda, in the globalist agenda. Fast forward to Francis, and he was at the UN talking about climate change, inviting in
Yes.
Jeffrey Sachs and the population control people, and the UN Sustainable Development people, the China Initiative, the silence on the just abject, terrible silence and the persecution of Christians in Nigeria and in Hong Kong and in China. They bought his silence. And, here is the the climate change movement didn't have a moral voice. Leo DiCaprio wasn't going to fill the bill. Certainly Al Gore wasn't. And lo and behold, here comes Jorge Bergoglio to give the moral voice to the climate change agenda. They won the seat of Peter. And to me, this has been, so if you look at the resistance that Benedict posed to the globalists versus the agenda that was immediately promoted by Francis, you can understand that there must have been an enormous effort. Look, we've seen the coup d'etat in the United States going on right now. We saw the coup d'etat of the CIA in Syria. We saw, the coup d'etat, you just go through all the Middle East countries, in Egypt, et cetera, et cetera. Are they beyond doing a coup d'etat of a man who, is like Donald Trump, a pro-life, non-globalist, non-internationalist? No, of course not. Similarly, Francis has stepped into the shoes of promoting the globalist agenda. I think that's what Vigano wants us to continue to explore and to research and to ask those questions. We know that although Francis hates America, we know that Vigano loves the United States and feels very strongly that the United States is the last best hope, not only for freedom, but I think for the Catholic Church. And
yes, and because America has always, historically been seen as the bulwark against communism. I mean, again, that for the 20th century, we were Ronald Reagan. We were the one wall that was fighting against them, and I think you're right. Vigano sees that, and I think, I think one of the things I think he said recently was that commenting on our being spared, America being spared from communism, because he's commented on Sister Lucia, one of the seers of Fatima, was asked, would communism even spread to America? And she said it would, but went on to say, again, paraphrasing, but America would be spared the worst because of the generosity of the American people. And I think I've noticed Vigano has, I think, mildly alluded to that something very special about our country that's good, that maybe, and he's praying for, I'm sure, merit God helping us to not get as bad as it could be with a communist takeover. But
I agree, and I think, and I do think there's something unique about the American people, American Catholics specifically. You, I'm sure, know, like I do, Brian. I mean, people are on their knees.
Yes.
People who I never thought would be sending me articles and videos, awaking to the things that Vigano is talking about. But I might say, there are people who go to Mass every week that still don't know about Vigano.
Yes.
Shocking as that is.
Yes.
But we have to respond to the call of Archbishop Vigano.
Yes.
And what he's saying beyond McCarrick, beyond Francis, look beyond, it is the American people that have to carry the banner of freedom and re-Christianize the world. And
Yes.
and it's a battle like we faced many times over the centuries. And he is going to, the Lord has lifted up Vigano. He is going to continue to counsel us both spiritually as well as politically, because in order to separate and see what's going on in our church, it's important to know what's going on in our politics. Because sadly, Brian, we have Nancy Pelosi, Dick Durbin, Joe Biden, Patrick Leahy. You go through all the Catholics, a name only, that are leaders in our country. So I think it's important for us to everybody has got to study this, to understand it, to not shy away from the light, to come back to the faith despite what we've seen in the clergy abuse scandal. Now, we don't love our country any less because of the deep state and the horrors of what's going on. In fact, we may, feel a compulsion to work even harder. Similarly, we cannot love our church any less because of the evil men and women that infest the church. We can't say done with it, going somewhere else. Right. But yet that seems to be the prevailing attitude. Well, church, it's, we have to fight for both. And of course, Christ is our King, and and Vigano, we're not abandoned by our bishops. If we are, we always have Vigano, and that's all we need. I mean, this is what I'm coming to, is that this is all we need. We obviously have some great priests out there, some good bishops that are fighting the fight, under enormous pressure. But everybody has a role to play, and that's what I have really felt, very compelled to tell people, is that we really need to. Everybody has a role to play. We've got to step up, and you think, oh, what can I do? Well, my experience is that many people have really begun in the church to do their own research, to do their own, everybody's got talent, and how great a role to play, taking the lead from Vigano to continue to fight. St. Catherine of Siena, really, she had lived through a time that was a very, very difficult time in the church. And, there's a quote from her that I think really, it kind of exhorts us and can give us courage. She said, "You know well that God is the one who is strong, and all strength and power come from him. I beg you then, dearest brothers and sisters of this holy church, for the love of Christ crucified, remain firm and steadfast in what you have begun. Let neither the devil move you, nor certain people who are worse than the devil. There is no need to be afraid. Take heart with a sweet, holy gratitude, for God has given you grace and mercy. So we have to see the light." And I think, this is introduced by Vigano, the light in the dark.
The light in the dark, yes.
Children of light. And we must, battle the children of darkness. And he has identified our president as a child of light.
Yes.
And this is something that really we haven't been in a battle, really in generations. Many people didn't send their sons and daughters off to Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yes, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't like the World War II generation. No. Well, maybe before we go, if I can turn follow up on that another passage, because I think you're right. Vigano is signaling us a lot of things, and one is to pray, to fight, but also to be aware, to ask, as you kept saying, ask questions. So I'm going to read you again another passage from Vigano's comment on the McCarrick report, and maybe you can help our listeners understand, because it's packed with kind of look at this, look at this. So he says, and he's explaining why the McCarrick report didn't expose anything, why it didn't release the name, why it didn't actually identify the problem. And he says, here's why. If Jorge Maria Bergoglio owes his election to the conspiracy of the so-called San Gallen Mafia, for more, and again, for more information on that, we did a video, as Liz said, with Miss Mioni, who's writing a book on it. But if he owes it to the St. Gallen Mafia, which included ultra-progressive cardinals in constant and assiduous relationship with McCarrick, if McCarrick's endorsement of Cardinal Bergoglio found a hearing among the conclave electors and those who have the power of persuasion in the Vatican, if the resignation of Benedict XVI was in some way provoked or favored by interference from the deep church and the deep state, then he says it's logical that they wouldn't expose McCarrick. Now, again, that's a bombshell of lots of things going on there. It's also linked to a passage where he explains, now some European readers may be aware of this, but I think this is really one of the first times in English this fact has come out, that there were voting irregularities in the conclave. He goes on to say that the fourth vote on the day Bergoglio was elected Pope Francis, there was a voting irregularity, and they broke the rules of the conclave and voted a fifth time, which is not permitted by the law, as set down by John Paul II most recently. And again, I think that passage is linked to what I just read. So maybe can you explain a little bit? There seems to be a lot of accusations there that he's asking us to look into. Maybe try and unpack them for our readers a little bit.
Sure. There's been a lot of speculation as to why Benedict stepped down, because obviously 7 years later he's still alive. Right. But the readers will recall that there was, at his request, what they called the Red Dossier, which was a 300-page document compiled by, I think, two cardinals, friends of his that he trusted, about what was going on both financially and morally, and the sexual agenda of the homosexuals in the Vatican. It was quite a dossier, very shocking. And it was given to him in December of 2012. Supposedly he passed that on to Bergoglio. No one's ever seen it. My argument is, and I've written about this, where's the damn dossier?
Right.
First of all, if there are crimes in there, they should be prosecuted. If these people are not being prosecuted, to occur. So for your listeners, the Red Dossier is one that, as Catholics, we should demand its transparency be seen. There's another very curious thing that happened in January, around January 1st, that all the ATMs in the Vatican, maybe it was Christmas as well as a couple of weeks, shut down. People could not access money. It impacted all the tourism going into the Vatican Museum and Vatican events. So all the ATMs suddenly, by Moneyval, which is a European commission, claiming that there were some irregularities with the Vatican Bank. Well, newsflash,
but it was only the Vatican. It wasn't all of Rome, or just so people understand. Yes,
the Vatican.
Yes.
So shortly thereafter, Benedict resigned, announced his resignation, and all of a sudden the ATMs miraculously were now functioning and open again, which certainly in my mind suggests that there was a link between his resignation, as if this was, putting the screws to Benedict, and we expect you to step down, and that to me is more of a global political group as opposed to somebody within within the Vatican, the globalists who have power over the Vatican banking system. So that to me was, very curious. There was certainly the recognition we have in Batty leaks, the recognition that Benedict was, somebody that they could not work with. There were also lots of comments about how wonderful Francis was, and John Podesta, and how this is somebody who, will be able to work with. So this global conspiracy, whether it was being driven by the United States and Germany and Italy, or in conjunction with them, certain people will play their part. Those in the Vatican who were playing their part, McCarrick spreading his financial goodies to everybody. We just don't know. I mean, to me, this needs to be uncovered for a number of reasons. One, this delegitimizes the, Francis papacy. Francis has appointed far more cardinals, I think, than anybody ever has, so that everybody says, oh, we'll just wait till the next pope. That's not going to work. And I'm sure that Vigano has information and, in context with respect to that. Probably, the great Italian writers and journalists have more information. For whatever reason, they're not coming forward. But, we in the United States, I know there are many writers who've been trying to hammer home what went on, who was involved. Now that we see what's going on in the United States with the CIA, NSA, the deep state, and the pressure and lies and the infiltration of China. What role did China play in getting rid of Benedict and imposing Francis? And these are questions, I mean, they're not heretical questions. We have a right to ask these questions to get to the bottom of this very disturbing and curious, at the very least, abdication.
So do you think I'd be overstating it if I were to characterize what we just read? Is it Vigano is suggesting there was a coup d'etat, right? An organized, or suggesting we should ask, a coup d'etat, a plan to remove Benedict, get him out of the way, and specifically then put Bergoglio there. I mean, do you think that's overstated? And then I guess the third piece of evidence he doesn't mention that maybe we could talk is, because Bergoglio then enters and immediately seems to be executing a plan, a very radical plan, right? He comes out with Evangelium Gaudium, which is a revolutionary blueprint, where he says, here's how I'm going to remake the church. Again, do you think I may be overstating it, or what do you think?
No, I think that's precisely what has happened. It mirrors what's happened in the United States. And frankly, I think the globalist agenda was put in the back burner under Benedict. They expected in 2005 that Bergoglio was going to be put in place. He was number 2 in the voting. The globalist agenda was put on the back burner with Trump. So yes, when you're not getting the people in place, then you have to topple them. And we, this is what even Obama understood, the importance of the Vatican, in the importance of this moral force to be pushing ahead the climate change, the globalist agenda. Now,
and it's interesting, that's what the communist Chinese figured out, right? Because the Soviets first tried to just crush the church. Right. But the Chinese set up this fake patriotic Catholic association, right? That realized, don't crush them, use them.
Yeah, exactly. President Xi at Davos, which is the World Economic Forum, where all the globalists came, in 2017, he announced, and nobody took him seriously or thought there was in 2017, he said, all roads lead to Rome. And so he had already, and according to whistleblowers, since 2014, supposedly the Chinese have been paying the Vatican $2 billion a year. And so the Chinese understand, as they do, paying off countries, paying off dictators, that money buys loyalty. Certainly he they got that with Francis. Now, with respect to what you raised, Brian, about the ideological agenda, Evangelii Gaudium, which of course was the socialist blueprint. I mean, if anybody, pull away the 45,000, 55,000 words,
Yes.
Probably goes. But
at least the Communist Manifesto was short.
right. But you see the interfaith dialogue, the Abrahamic dialogue, the conversion of Christianity and Chrislam, the Abrahamic foundation that he has created, the Pachamama, the embracing of paganism, the embracing of Lutheranism. These are all the whittling down of the tenets of Catholic faith and the theology, and the meshing of all religions, including paganism, into one world religion. That is Francis's agenda. If you look at the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, right in the heart, I was there, I saw it with my own eyes. That is the ideological think tank that is being used by Francis to promote these agendas. They do, it was created by, I think, John Paul II to, have a discussion of ideas. No, there's no discussion. This is pushing a leftist globalist agenda. From the moment he came in, his first major speaker on July 1st, 2013, Pope Francis had pro-abortion, population control, radical Soros brain trust of Jeffrey Sachs from the United States, speaking as his, and he has spoken 30 times, 40 times at the Vatican. He's written Vatican documents. He has imposed and inserted all the UN radical Soros people into the Vatican to drive the agenda. So he's had the Lutheran, the interfaith dialogue, the Abrahamic dialogue, the global. Now this is what really, it all gets my Irish, but the global compact on
education, yes.
Children to teach them about socialism and frankly communism. The in promoting climate change, as and he said at the conference, climate change. There's a nexus between climate change and human trafficking. It's absurd. But they take a real issue and hoodwink it and bootstrap it with a phony one. He did the same thing with the coronavirus. He said climate change is caused, or coronavirus is caused by climate change. It's absurd. But this economy of Francesco, which you had in Assisi, that big conference, which was to promote, destroy capitalism and promote socialism. Pachamama, the pagan idol, the nativity scene, the abomination of the nativity scene. And you see, truth and beauty of the Catholic Church. That's what we as Catholics, love, deepen our faith. And you see the real bastardization of the beautiful nativity scene by Francis. Pachamama, which is an abomination. And also the embrace of the most brutal regime in the history of the United States, China, and the CCP.
Yes. Well, I think absolutely right. And interestingly, Bergoglio, growing up where he did in Argentina, this is a plan he would have seen executed in terms of a coup to install a dictator to execute the plan. And he did it. But maybe speaking on that, one last thing, because we're getting real towards the end. But one thing about this Vigano statement I'd like you to comment on. Throughout this, he refers sometimes to Pope Francis as the Argentine. And I'd like you to maybe comment on that and maybe respond to some people who try to dismiss Vigano and say, oh, he's not credible. One of the arguments they use is they try to just say, oh, he's just a disgruntled bureaucrat who lost his job, so he's just got a personal gripe against, his boss who removed him. And that's how they would interpret the use of, say, like that term, the Argentine. What would you say to that, and what do you really see that meaning when Vigano? And again, he does call him Pope Francis. That's because he doesn't say that he's not that, but he does use, and this was, I think, one of the first times I've seen him use that, the Argentine. So what would you say?
My reading of it, Brian,
Yes.
is that he has utter contempt for this cover-up of clergy sex abuse.
Yes.
That has been at the heart of this papacy, and utter contempt for the coddling and use of McCarrick, and probably continued use of McCarrick's influence, power, and money. I read it as utter contempt. And, frankly, those of us who have talked to victims of McCarrick can understand why, you would refer to Francis as the Argentine, because this was clearly Machiavellian sleight of hand of the Argentine, this report. Again, 400 pages, 450 pages, not unlike the garbage, of all the exhortations. Lots of words, but not getting to the truth. That's all we want is the truth.
Yes.
And then covering up and protecting Francis. And so that's my read of it. It jumped off the page to me. I identified it as somebody who's been involved in clergy abuse cases, the utter contempt for people in power who continue to facilitate this diabolical evil that is destroying Holy Mother Church. And if he wanted to send a strong message to the bishops around the world, he would have brought in McCarrick, had a trial, and locked him up in the Vatican jail and throw away the key.
Yes.
But he didn't.
And he would have brought others in. Because it was not just McCarrick. Yes.
Not just McCarrick. I mean, there's such a long line of people who looked the other way and facilitated McCarrick because he lined their pockets or whatever. They owe their, prominent position in the church to McCarrick. And there are many, many bishops and cardinals who do. So I thought that was appropriate. And I mean, I'm sure Vigano is just getting a bellyful of what's happening, and in relying on Americans to do some real legwork to find out what's going on in the Vatican, to expose it. And my plea would go out to all the world. There are people who know a lot more about what went on in the Benedict abdication, in the Francis election, and the only way we're going to clean out our church and restore Holy Mother Church is to expose the scandal and shine the light on the dark corners and operators that are continue to flourish. So
we need the equivalent of the Pennsylvania Gettysburg hearing into the U.S. election, right? That's where people come forward, members of the church, in that case, Pennsylvanians who had information, and for the love they have of their state and their country, brought it forward. We need the same thing for those who, if you really love the church, who know what went on in the abdication, the conclave, to come forward so that we can, as you say, shine a light on it. So
I've pleaded with a lot of whistleblowers in the Vatican, that know what went on. We got to pray that they're no longer afraid. Many are afraid of Jorge Bergoglio.
Yes.
So I would just finally say to the audience, St. Joan of Arc consoled us and said, "We are not afraid. We were born to do this." And this is the work of Catholics, is to fight for freedom, fight for truth, fight for holiness, fight for restoring the sacred to our church. And we got a lot of work to do, but we have a leader. Our leader, Vigano, Archbishop Vigano. He's really showed, courage, fearlessness, just it really tickles me that he loves this country and people so much, and our president. And I'm sure he's giving a lot of consolation to President Trump.
Yes. And I think it's important, and I've always noticed this, Archbishop Vigano always ends on a note of hope. Whatever he writes, no matter how difficult it is, he always ends with us to be hopeful. And I would just end with that, as you did, to tell our viewers, again, this is serious, disturbing information, but we cannot lose hope, because if God has chosen to permit Jorge Bergoglio to be part of this coup and to inflict the harm he has as the Pope, God doesn't abandon us. And just as he raised up Archbishop Lefebvre at the time of the Second Vatican Council, so there'd be one bishop, right, we can look to and say, he's telling us, I do believe he's risen up. Again, somebody came out of some place we didn't expect, but rose up, brought up Archbishop Vigano to be the shepherd, so that we're not abandoned, so that we know. And so we can't lose that hope. God's still in charge. This coup will fail ultimately, right? We don't know how long it's going to run its course, but God did take care of us, because he brought us a voice to let us see the truth, so that we are not deceived. So we can't lose hope and give into despair. And Vigano never does, despite what he's been through. He always maintains that hope. So, well, again, thank you so much for giving generously of your time. It's been very informative for me, and really a delightful conversation. And we'd love to have you come back to join us again another time, because it's very informative.
Well, thank you, Brian. It's always a delight. I'm so thrilled that this was on my bucket list to talk to you. So if I can check that off, and I'll be back again anytime you want to invite me back. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you to everyone for your attention, staying with us, and please share this video or audio podcast with everyone you can. Again, let's as we said, call people, those whistleblowers who are afraid to speak out, but you can play your part. Maybe you don't have any information, but you can share this with people so that they become aware. So please be an apostle for us and do that. Thank you, everyone, and I will see you next time.